Good morning from the Canadian Rockies. Now, this is a travel site, but in fact, to me travel, of course. But I did want to take a few minutes and just talk about the Canadian election. Now, why do I want to do that? Well, I travel extensively and I have quite a large social media presence, so I've had so many questions coming in, particularly about this election, which is going to be next Monday, the 28th of April. Now, why is this particular election interesting to people around the world? I think it's kind of self-evident. It's the elephant in the room. Donald Trump has trolled Canada for a number of months. He says it should be the 51st state. He had a very peculiar relationship with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and that has loomed large over this election and probably changed the outcome of it. So just as a quick backtrack for those who are not from a parliamentary system, Canada's political system comes from the Westminster tradition in the UK. There's some nuanced differences, and that is similar to Australia. New Zealand has changed tack somewhat and has a proportional representation system. But all that noted, Canadians do not vote directly for their Prime Minister. Prime Minister runs in one of the 338 seats in the Canadian Parliament and becomes Prime Minister according to which party wins the most seats. So for the last 9 years, the Liberal Party has been in power over several elections, although it was a minority parliament, meaning no one party had a majority of seats, but they had enough seats to build coalitions or have enough people to vote to keep them in power. In fact, one of the nuanced differences in the Canadian system is if the government loses a vote, that triggers the fall of government and can trigger an election. Not necessarily, but it can. Where Canada is also somewhat different than, say, the UK, is that there are 10 provinces, each with its own either provincial parliament or provincial legislature. Then Yukon Territory has the party system. Nunavut and Northwest Territories actually have a consensus system. That's worth another video unto itself. So why is this particular election so interesting? Well, of course, Canada was already at a fairly difficult phase, just like all other Western democracies. There was fairly significant inflation after the COVID lockdown. Housing is a genuine crisis in this country. And Canada, only 41 million people, but the most ethnically diverse country by most measures in the world, and has grown immeasurably, measurably, but by about 1 million people a year with immigration, yet with a lack of housing. So there's genuine challenges. But on top of all of that, it's the fact that the US president has trolled the former Prime Minister and trolled Canada and slapped on tariffs. In fact, the reality of the economic relationship with the US and the world, as Canada has known it since the 1980s, has fundamentally changed, and that is part of the conversation. However, let's go back to the tail end of the pandemic when a fairly right-wing fringe group of Canadians went and took over Ottawa for a period of time. A huge amount of the money that came in to support them came from the US media, particularly Tucker Carlson's and people like that, played a big role. And all of a sudden, people outside of this country had strong opinions about particularly Justin Trudeau. Now, I'm not expressing an opinion here either way, but it was amazing to me as travel started again, how I would meet people with this vitriol towards him without understanding how the system works. So in terms of the media environment, there was a lot of influence from outside of this country, and I think that's quite significant. Inside the country, there is a reasonably healthy media environment. There's CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Radio-Canada, which is publicly funded, has been quite continuously attacked by the Conservatives, although not totally thrown out. And you do see the rise of some of the more fringe, usually populist, generally right-wing media playing a role. But I would say, fortunately, it hasn't taken over the conversation in this country, but it did contribute enough to cause Justin Trudeau to step down as Prime Minister. Now, lots of other reasons, lots of other conversations to have, huge jurisdictional debates within this country. All that noted, when Parliament closed down to lead into this election, there were 5 political parties represented there. So the Liberals had the most seats, but their popularity was very low. Then the Conservatives, under Pierre Poilievre, were looking like they would form government quite quickly. Third party, the New Democratic Party, more the Socialist Party, had a quite an important voice. And then in the province of Quebec, of course, there's a Bloc Québécois, which is aligned with the separatist movement, but always being a voice for Quebec and to some extent French Canadian voices. And then the Green Party had a presence. There's also a fringe party called the People's Party, which is polled. At one point they peaked up around 5%, but they sit at about 2%, and they're that predictable anti-immigrant kind of fringe that one gets in all Western democracies these days. Now, because of Trump slapping tariffs on, attacking Trudeau, I mean, imagine being trolled by the president of the biggest economy in the world. I mean, very peculiar and certainly not in line with old American conservative values, but it is what it is, and that's the reality. So, and this accusation that Canada would become the 51st state, and the fact that a lot of that right-wing media in the States, particularly the Fox environment, has suddenly taken a very harsh approach to Canada. It's quite stunning to Canadians. What has happened is that has actually united Canadians in really a powerful sense. Interestingly enough, that fringe group that took over Parliament have not really been heard from. Very fascinating that they've disappeared. But what has changed all of a sudden in this election is Mark Carney, who has genuinely impressive credentials. He had been the head of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England during Brexit, respected PhD, international economist, and so forth, stepped into the role, won the leadership of the Liberal Party. So again, this is the point. You're not voting directly for him. He will be running for a seat in the Ottawa area, but he became Prime Minister by proclamation because he won leadership of the Liberal Party. So he is now Prime Minister of Canada, called the election, quite a tight election, just about a month long, and he is leading in the polls now. So what looks like will happen is next Monday, the Liberals might win a majority of seats, but they seem to be ahead in the polls. It seems that they're a center party. They were sort of center-left. They're probably center-center at the moment. The Conservatives seem to be just hitting a ceiling that they always do in this country, around 38% support. And that support is very focused in certain regions. And again, to understand the first past the post parliamentary system, you just need to win the seat with the most number of votes. So if there's 5 candidates running in one seat, then someone can actually win that seat with 32%, for example. So, and then they win that seat. Well, the Conservative base is generally rural and focused particularly in the Western provinces. In fact, my province here will, of I think 27 seats, you can expect 22 to go Conservative. But that also means that vote splitting that happens elsewhere will probably drive a lot more support for Liberals in some of the big, heavy populated areas, particularly GTA, Greater Toronto Area, Vancouver, Montreal. That's where Canadians live, 41 million people, but they're focused in some very specific areas. So the model, it's probably fair to say that the polling it's been fairly consistent for the last couple of months. So the American influence from the American right and hard right and fringe right has actually driven Canadians to the middle. So it's been an interesting move. I would say, as someone who believes very much in the concepts of human rights and equality, it makes me proud that Canada has not been as manipulated by the fringe media. It's there. You get much more slogan chanting and that sort of thing than we've seen in the past. But overall, it seems to be a fairly balanced move, and Canadians are uniting around the fact that the world order has changed so enormously that we collectively have developed more of a sense of we and who we are once again, and how we're going to move forward. So, do tune in, but please don't get caught into this idea that it's a popularity contest between just 2 people, because it's much more nuanced in this country. And given the way presidential elections have gone in the US and France and elsewhere around the world, it seems like a bit of a healthier conversation. And it would be nice if we could continue to have genuine conversations about the future of this country and its role in the world without the slogans and the chants and the hate-filled speech. But anyway, hopefully that helps a little bit answering a few of the questions. And I will see you all on Monday night.